Years ago, the great actor Richard Burton, I'm probably dating myself because I actually remember him, was given a grand reception in his childhood parish. He asked the parishioners if there was anything they especially wanted to hear from him. After about a minute's pause, his old pastor asked him if he would recite the Good Shepherd Psalm, Psalm 23, which he had taught Burton in his Sunday school. A strange look came over the actor's face. Then he paused for a moment and said, "I will on one condition, that after I have recited it, you, my pastor and teacher, will do the same." Well, the old and retired pastor said, "I'm not an actor, but if you wish it, I shall do so." And then, very impressively, Richard Burton began the psalm. His voice and intonation were perfect. He held his audience spellbound, and as he finished, a great burst of applause broke from the audience. And as it began to die away, the old pastor rose from his wheelchair and began to recite the same psalm. His voice was very feeble and shivering, and his tone was not at all faultless. But when he finished, there was not a dry eye in the room. And then Richard Burton stood up, and his own voice quivered as he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I reached your eyes and your ears, but my old pastor has reached your hearts. And the difference is just this: I know the psalm, but he knows the shepherd." Today is Good Shepherd Sunday, the fourth Sunday of Easter. And this Good Shepherd Sunday, Jesus wants us to know him by experiencing him. As he said in the gospel, "My sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me." And you know, hearing this, I can't help but reflect on the gift of the priesthood. The Good Shepherd, Jesus himself, knew the importance of not leaving us to our own folly, not leaving us to our own demise. So he instituted the sacrament of holy orders to entrust us to the care of priests, to help us on our journey to heaven. And very sadly, the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of this awesome gift of priests is my need to apologize for my own failures as a priest and the failure of all of us who are priests and bishops. It's tragic that our human flaws and errors often are seen and experienced by all of you. We are not always good shepherds modeling the Good Shepherd. And we priests will pay for that in purgatory, or perhaps in hell. But despite the characters that we are, I still cannot help but recognize the greatness of what priests do. You know, as a society, we are very diligent at trying to be healthy and take care of our bodies. But when we finally come to the reality of the importance of our souls, then we begin to see the necessity of the priesthood in our lives. When I was about 4 years old, my pastor, Father Monteleone, he was a giant, almost as tall as me. He gave me a rosary. And he looked at my mom and he said, "Teach him to pray this." And my mom did. And that made an impact on me. It touched me right from the early days of my life. Then I couldn't wait to be an altar boy. I pestered our associate pastor, Father Bragandi. Came from an Italian parish, could you tell? Until I think I made him sick of seeing me. I pestered him so much. Finally, when I was 8 years old, I became an altar boy. And I would go to Mass nearly every single day. My poor mom would wash and iron my cassock and surplice, because back in those days, we were given a cassock and a surplice. And it was our responsibility to make sure that they were crisp and clean. And my mom had to starch the surplice so that every time I wore it, it got wrinkled. So every time I wore it, she had to iron it again. But she did it out of sacrificial love. I was so privileged to be able to go to receive Holy Communion nearly every day of my life. I was within a mile of my church, and so I would walk to church every day so that I could go to Mass, in the hopes, sometimes, that the altar boys might not show up and I would be able to serve. And as I got older, my mom would be like a taxi service to all sorts of the big Masses, when the bishop would come to town or when there was a special event, and I would go to serve at those Masses. I'll never forget Sister Crescentia, my second grade teacher. She taught us all. You pray 3 Hail Marys every day of your life so that you will know your vocation in life, and for the gift of purity. To this day, I get out of bed in the morning, I get down on my knees, and I still pray 3 Hail Marys since I was in second grade. That's paid off, big time. Daily Mass has been a part of my life for so many years. Not to say that there weren't times that I just went to Mass on Sundays, but that was very rare. But I came to realize how important this was in my life after I was ordained a deacon. I was ordained a deacon, and my summer assignment, one of my duties was that I had to go on a week-long trip on a Habitat for Humanity trip with the youth from the Catholic high school. I was terribly troubled that week, not because I happened to be smaller than the teenagers and they put me under the house working on the sewer, not because of that, but because there was a priest on this trip with us, and he would not celebrate Mass until the last day of the week. There I was, a deacon of the church. I'd received communion most days of my life, and now I'm just freshly ordained a deacon, and for 6 days, I couldn't receive the Holy Eucharist. That frustrated me. And I couldn't help but think also of 2 years ago when COVID shut down our churches, and you all were deprived of the great gift of the Eucharist. Tragic. That 1 week made me realize how much I needed a priest to celebrate the Holy Mass. There are many days that I offer 2 Masses a day because that's what priests do. There are times when I really need to go to confession, not because of mortal sin, but because I find myself becoming a bit testy or finding temptations becoming seemingly stronger in my life. Also, I need to go to confession because I don't think I'm going to be a very good confessor unless I first recognize what a sinner I am. Thanks be to God, here in Charlestown, it's easy for me to go to confession since I'm close to other priests. But for the last 17 years or so of my life, that wasn't the case. And there were times that I had to drive great distances to find a priest, and I went to confession to any priest I would encounter, even if it was not the priest that I would like. But that priest still absolves my sins, and I receive the grace of God's mercy through the voice and through the hands, because that's what priests do. I'll never forget when a friend of mine called and asked me to witness their marriage. They lived in Pennsylvania and wanted to come to me for their marriage. I said, "What about your family and your friends? The inconvenience?" Their response was, "We will bring 2 witnesses, but we need a priest for the sacrament." That's what priests do. I remember getting a call to go to the neonatal unit at Ruby Memorial Hospital in Morgantown. This little tiny baby boy was fighting for life, as the parents just wanted to embrace their firstborn child, a son. His life was quickly escaping. Well, with the nurse's assistance, I went in and I baptized the boy. And through the tears of his parents, there was joy in the air, because they knew that if they could not have him in this life, they were grateful that he was a saint for them in heaven. That's what priests do. I was called to the nursing home for someone who was dying. When I entered the room, there was so much tension in the air, you could cut it with a knife. The dying man was kind of thrashing in the bed, not peaceful at all. The family was agitated, and I gave him the anointing of the sick, or what many refer to as the last rites. And I'll never forget the peace that immediately consumed the room before he died. That's what priests do. I regret that there may be times that I and my brother priests and bishops are reciting the psalm, but it may not seem that we know the shepherd. But that too is somehow the beauty of the priesthood. Because even though the priest is imperfect, he is merely the instrument for the Good Shepherd. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, uses all the flaws and all the imperfections of the priest to love his people. And the reality is that the life of the priest is not his own. His life is for others. That's why God gave it to us. Above all, the priest is called to be a sacrificial servant, a victim, as was the Good Shepherd. And this is where I can't help but to say thank you to my mom, who was the best example to me of what that really means. And not just my mom, but the other women, like Sister Crescentia, and all those who were like mothers to me, who really define the meaning of sacrifice for those of us who are priests. Mothers and those who are like mothers, don't underestimate the power of your sacrificial example of love to form priests. Thank you, moms, for all the times you not just read the psalm, but gave us a real glimpse of the Good Shepherd. Happy Mother's Day.